Hello, my sultry art sluts. It's Allison Moon, and you're listening to Artgasm. On today's episode, I speak with drag performer and performance artist extraordinaire Pepper Pepper. I'm super excited for the interview, and I certainly hope you enjoy it as well. Before we get to that, I wanted to apologize if an apology is necessary. I don't know, I'm a lady. I tend to over-apologize, so maybe I'm doing something horrible to my gender. But basically, I've been sick for about a week, and my throat is all over the place. I'm feeling much better, but my Patreon post was delayed, and I'm kind of getting this one in under the wire as well. So I certainly appreciate everyone's patience and appreciate people who, for not being too impatient with me as I get over the sickness. But I have a tall glass of kvass sitting next to me, and I'm feeling much better. I just discovered the Russian market near my house, and I'm so excited because there are a couple of foods that I found hard to find since I arrived in my new hometown of Portland, Oregon. And certain things I really like. Sauerkraut, surprisingly hard to find in a city so known for its food culture. I don't know. I just can't find my preferred sauerkraut brands. But luckily, this Russian market has homemade pickles, and it has kvass, and it has like 12 different brands of kvass. And it's just makes me feel so much better. There's a lot of conversation you might hear about how white people have no culture. And it's true, because whiteness is a construct. Whiteness is just a kind of almost arbitrary combination of different cultures designated to be better than the rest because of, the historical forces of colonialism and imperialism and all those things. Right. We know this. But I used to feel kind of bummed out when I would hear those things about whiteness not having culture, because I felt very disconnected from my heritage, just like a lot of white people do. I didn't have a sense of cultural heritage at all. And so I decided to start investigating that. On my father's side, we really didn't have any idea where my dad's side of the family came from, really. But my mom's side came over to America fairly recently, and I actually had access to a long lineage of amazing people. And so I started digging into that, and I realized that a lot of the foods that my grandma made that I used to hate, nowadays as an adult, I love. Many things, including sauerkraut, pickles, and kvass. So I'm so happy to have bread-flavored soda, rye bread-flavored soda that I can enjoy on a hot day like today. But yeah, discovering my Slavic culture was actually really important to me. And I'm so happy that I was able to start investigating, the food culture and the religious culture and the fashion and all these different amazing things that kind of fed into my recent cultural heritage. All of the matriarchs and patriarchs of my family, other than my immediate parents, are now gone. So I regret not being able to talk to my grandmother about her experiences growing up in the Slavic village in Cleveland, Ohio. But, I still feel like I'm connected in a new way now. And so if you're one of those people who felt like, golly gee, I don't like that people think that I have no culture, you know what? You do. You just have to get a little bit more specific, a little bit more granular. Explore actually where your people came from, where your people are from, and you might find a lot of really interesting, beautiful bounty there. Speaking of culture, this isn't really an art story, but this is a thing that I wanted to discuss. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit more with a future episode with Connor Habib, but one of these amazing pieces that I read lately, I wanted to share with you, and I'm remiss for not mentioning it earlier. I thought maybe I had mentioned it on a prior podcast, and if so, I'm just going to go a little bit deeper into it now. This was a post I came across on Medium by Kai Sheng about social justice call-out culture. So yeah, I guess the awkward segue is, speaking of culture, call-out culture. And honestly, in this day and age on the internet, whenever anybody adds the word culture or politics to the end of an otherwise totally acceptable thing, I start to get a little bit wary, such as PC, culture, identity, politics, social justice, culture. So this piece was really great. There's so much about it that I find really beautiful. And this piece, called I Hope We Choose Love, Notes on the Application of Justice, I think this piece does a really good job of setting the tone for, I think, many conversations yet to come around the way we have difficult conversations within radical, liberal, leftist frameworks, around people who are very much passionate about changing the conversation, about furthering the conversation, about making sure more people feel invited into the conversation. I think this piece does a great job of reminding us why we care about that. And I think a lot of people will probably relate to what Kai-Sheng is saying in a number of different ways around the ways that call it culture can remediate, reestablish, reify the punitive nature of our society, right? In many leftist movements, we talk about abolishing the prison system, for instance. We talk about the asymmetrical application of the criminal justice system to harm the most vulnerable populations that we have, right? So the movement around abolishing ICE is a great example of this. But there is this kind of challenge that we face when we also find ourselves very gratified by watching people we don't like burn. And this, to me, is pretty hypocritical, pretty challenging. And I watch it all the time in leftist circles. I think anybody who spends any time in any sort of movements whatsoever find themselves in the quagmire of call-out culture and all of the damaging ways it can be about performative activism. It can be about the, like, I'm woker than thou, for instance. And I think what Kai-Sheng does here is so brilliantly elucidates the problems with that, and I think draws some great steps towards what could possibly happen in the future. And I think that's what makes this piece so much more powerful than some of the other pieces that kind of suggest that call-out culture is a problem. This piece actually does do a good job of outlining alternatives that are within transformative justice frameworks, which are complex and require understanding, and it requires scholarship, which is, I think, one of the reasons why a lot of people still don't quite understand how they work. And I think we're approaching a new era, I believe, I hope, I pray, in our culture, in Western culture, where we are establishing a foundation to use alternatives to the carceral system. And these are not new things. These are things that have been established mostly by women of color in communities to protect each other, to protect themselves from the cops, from having a judge and jury decide what is best for their families. So this work has been going on for a very long time, and it's starting to reach the mainstream in tiny doses, mostly because of these movements around, especially Me Too. We're seeing, what do we do with people who didn't necessarily break the law, but still do need to be responsible for some healing that needs to happen, right? And so I think white America is hopefully starting to get the message around this. I think a lot of different communities who thought that the carceral system was really the only / best way to deal with people who've hurt other people, hopefully are starting to learn a couple things about what alternatives there actually are. So I think there's a lot of hope there, but at the same time, there's a lot of frustration, anger, fear, resentment, and all the horrible feelings because of the way that we misapply these tools to one another in community, especially community that we are supposed to be theoretically lifting one another up. So I'm just going to read this one paragraph that I think sets the tone for what exactly Sheng is talking about here. So this is from I Hope That We Choose Love, Notes on the Application of Justice. Unfortunately, the enactment of justice in radical leftism also played out in my life as a total invalidation of my boundaries, and I'm not great at boundaries in the first place. For a time, I became quite valorized in my local community as a good upholder of social justice, because I was very good at using the right language and doing the right things, and I tended to apologize unreservedly and perfectly when I, quote, fucked up. I now recognize this as a skill born of trauma, the ability to ceaselessly and accurately scan the people in one's environment for a sense of what will please them and to enact it, no matter the cost to one's long-term health. This skill is a brilliant short-term survival strategy, as most trauma strategies are, designed to negotiate the unpredictability and cruelty of punishment. And unfortunately, much of social justice is deeply embedded in a punishment narrative. And then Sheng goes on to elucidate some of the experiences that Sheng had in social justice spaces, particularly at the hands of white women. And it does a great job of setting up this idea of the virtuous versus the predator, or the victim versus the wrongdoer, and this binary that we often see everywhere in life, but also very much in social justice behavior. As Sheng says, that the reason why white womanhood is so useful here, because of very practical ways, but at the same time as a symbol, because white womanhood symbolizes innocence, purity, ideological purity, virtue. And so if somebody who is innocent is acted against, then the other person becomes a guilty party. And so, as Sheng says, the first innocent person is seen as free of all and any responsibility for the situation, and the second, that the guilty party is then rendered available for punishment. The logic then follows. If someone has done something bad, then it is okay to be aggressive or even violent toward them. We like punishment in social justice land. Lots of people in many societies and subcultures like punishment. Of course we do. It feels good to see someone who has hurt you receive a painful consequence for their actions. And we get that feeling by proxy when we see someone who has hurt someone else get punished. I don't think that's wrong in and of itself. I have lots of revenge fantasies, and they are very, very comforting to me at certain times. The problem is the enactment of punishment and revenge. And no, I don't really see a meaningful distinction between punishment and revenge, though that is, of course, up for debate. As we know, pain and violence tend to replicate themselves like a virus. Punishment does not end violence. On the contrary, it breeds it. So this is it's not very long of a post. I think it's a really great one. I think it's so worthwhile in the very intersectional way of art and social justice applications. I think that this applies to probably a number of the communities that you may be part of. Certainly applies to hate watching and hate reading and getting, the Michael Jackson eating popcorn in the movie theater jazz of watching people get dragged on the internet. This is something that my personal yoga, as I've been saying, is to step away from that, is to not find joy in other people's pain, even as it might feel, as Kai Sheng says, kind of satisfying. And we can entertain those fantasies, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that it becomes a problem when pile-on culture happens. So again, I'm going to talk to Connor Abib more about this in a future episode. I do recommend you read the article. Let me know what you think about the piece. I think it's really valuable. I will have a link to it, as always, in the show notes on artgasmcast.com. Okay. So one little bit of business before I get to the show. I want to just thank everybody else who's joined my Patreon in the last 2 weeks. It's getting very close to my $100 a month goal so that I can get transcripts on the podcast. So I appreciate everyone who's helped get me closer to that goal. And I do apologize again to my patrons for the delayed post. I did have a really great time recording this one, though. It's all about deep fakes and using celebrity faces for sexual fantasies in public spheres. So do give that a listen if you're a Patreon subscriber. If you're curious, you can certainly become a member, or you can just follow me on Patreon just to see. And that's patreon.com/artgasm. And sorry for my phone blowing up in the background there. I'm learning right now that my niece just had her baby. So congratulations, Callie, on the new addition to the family. All right, so allow me to introduce my conversation with Pepper Pepper. I saw Pepper Pepper perform their piece, and they're going to talk about kind of the different movements of the piece at the top of the show. Probably a while ago when I first moved here. It was my first outing to an arts program since I moved to Portland, and I'm so happy. And this is also a little shout out to other people who work in the framework of sex and art in Portland. If you are interested in being a guest on Artgasm, or if you know somebody who's local who'd like to be on Artgasm, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always looking forward to meeting new people in this very unique little field of interest in my new hometown. So do check that out. Do share that with me if you can. You can always reach out to me at artgasmcast@gmail.com. You can send me thoughts, tips, people that I should know about. And one more note before we get to the interview. This was one of my earlier interviews, and so the microphone... Well, I could blame the microphone, but honestly, it was me. I did not set my settings correct. So ultimately, the sound quality in this episode is not great. It kind of moves all over the place. So please be aware that it's going to be not up to my normal standards. And then also it's going to shift a little bit halfway through and then shift back. It's listenable. It's enjoyable. But, just be aware if sound quality is a little bit not so great. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and please enjoy my conversation with Pepper Pepper. Lovely. All right. Well, then let's get started.
All right.
Pepper Pepper. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining me.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to talk to you because I saw you perform one of the movements of your, is it 3-movement piece?
It's a 3-cycle performance and research project.
Ah, lovely.
Yes.
Called Diva Practice, whole thing.
Yeah, the project as a whole cycle is called Diva Practice. And then there's the Diva Practice Duet, the Diva Practice Solo, and eventually the Diva Practice Ensemble.
Lovely. So in Diva Practice, I saw what I consider to be very traditional tropes of drag done in a kind of almost deconstructed way.
Yes.
And so I would love for you to tell me a little bit about your, I guess maybe how you found your way into drag, how you developed, if you would consider Pepper Pepper a persona or an aspect of your persona, I'm not quite sure, but how you found your way from whatever you were doing into this kind of art form.
Well, I started doing drag when I was young. I was 16, and I had dabbled in doing these kind of pop-up drag shows that my queer youth support group that I was so fortunate to be in had every now and then. And my characters were always these old, grizzled comedians. Like, my first drag character ever, her name was Blanche the Morning After Pill. So my humor was spot on right at an early age. And I wore this nasty big Dee Snider wig and a little slip and covered my eyes and just whatever makeup I could find. Probably stole it. And it was hilarious. It was fun and it was crude and perfect for a 15-year-old, 16-year-old. And but I kind of flew in and out of, cross-dressing in my daily life for a long time. And then when I moved to Portland, I joined this drag troupe called Sissy Boy, that was 10 years ago. And we were a gender, punk, rock, anti-pageant queen, monster drag gig. And it was really fun. And that's where I kind of got my start in Portland. And from there, the change in my identity and name and practice has evolved into what is now Miss Pepper Pepper.
Okay. And what is Miss Pepper Pepper? How has the evolution arrived there?
So about 5 years ago, that's about 5 years into RuPaul's Drag Race being on TV, something clicked and changed where I started getting booked and paid and asking for payment and taking it a little bit more seriously than I had before, the drag specifically, because I have been doing other art practices at the time, but I just kind of started pushing her to the forefront, and since then she's just evolved and grown into being what she does now.
It's interesting because I feel like probably right around the time RuPaul's Drag Race began, I personally noticed a shift in how drag was kind of done, even in the mainstream ways, because I think a lot of people, when they think of a drag show, they think of a queen lip-syncing to divas at a gay bar and these very camp tropes of femininity. And what I think RuPaul's Drag Race brought to the mainstream, but also what I saw this a lot in Los Angeles, was the monster drag, the punk rock, the gritty, the grimy, the scary kind of drag.
Sure.
And I think it was really interesting to hear that. So as you became Pepper Pepper, which, in my experience of Diva Practice is my only experience of you in your performance space, it didn't feel too scary or monstrous, but there were certainly elements of kind of the creepy or the kind of off that I thought saw you kind of bring towards it.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of pathos in diva practice. A lot of diva practice. Well, diva practice is a performance piece about drag queens dancing with uncertainty, because being fabulous takes practice. That's the tagline.
Nice.
And for diva practice solo, I really sunk into my song choices and my relationships to the myths of certain divas, the myths of certain gay icons, the myths of what a diva is or isn't, and then also contemplating and reconstructing the stories behind the performer and presentation. And I really felt that mirrored the act of being a drag queen very clearly, is that there's a mask and a talent that you present to the public that they feed back attention and money and adoration and scorn and whatever they're going to give you. And you feed on that and you keep giving it back to them. And it's just it's a relationship. But just like the tip of the iceberg, there's so much more that goes on to creating the artwork or creating a persona or just the ins and outs of that concept. And so a lot of diva practice was me looking at what it takes to get on stage and then using that as my material for the work itself. And a lot of my own practice with diva, how do I say that? A lot of my diva practice was sinking into feelings and ideas as opposed to orchestrating specific choreography about specific divas. While, yes, I did use a slew of amazing female vocalists from the gay canon in the show, I really wanted to use that as a way to talk about my own feelings or sink into these abstract, nebulous feeling/physical spaces, which is where a lot of my choreography and movement came from.
It sounds almost like you're allowing people to see a little bit more of a drag performer than they might normally see. You're kind of inviting them into the process and the layers behind that.
Yeah, I think something that I didn't forward is what a lot of folks call booger drag or monster drag. I wasn't forwarding the horror or like the big prosthetics and blood, and I've done tons of blood stuff in my time, fake blood, real blood, whatever. I didn't forward the monstrousness of the spectacle. I wanted to keep it more on the emotional current and the conceptual current so that the intensity or awkwardness and pain of the diva was kind of ever present. And that was an intentional choice in my show so that it would be, I think, a bit more of a slow burn, because I think I modeled the arc of what I think a diva goes through in a life, in a day, in a show, within the show. And I think that there's always a bit of pain that's involved with having to be vulnerable and receptive while also offering something above and beyond what others expect of you.
I think what was interesting about that show and what you're describing now is kind of, there have always obviously been parallels between kind of gay men and diva in terms of these kind of expectations and audience, or not necessarily gay men, but drag queen and diva, in that there's this expectation from the audience for divas to expose themselves for our pleasure and to go through pain at the hands usually of men for our pleasure, and to dig deep into this kind of the pathos for the audience's approval, this torch song kind of quality.
Absolutely.
And so what I think was so interesting about the way you discuss this in your show was you really are kind of forcing the audience to question whether the ethics of that kind of appreciation. We're watching somebody go through pain and it feels good because we kind of expect them to do that for us.
Absolutely.
So I thought it was interesting when you're kind of stripping, you actually kind of go through a lot of layers, literally. You have costume under costume and padding under the costume and wig under wig, which I thought was so cool because there are a lot of these amazing reveals. But there's also so much of you are confrontational in that way too. You kind of surprise us and titillate, and then all of a sudden you force us to sit with that and the complications therein.
At that point in diva practice, I am only allowed to say 2 words. Actually, throughout the show, I'm only saying 2 words vocally. I lip sync tons of words, but those are other people's work that I am embodying and possessing me, in a sense. Whereas my own authentic body and voice, whatever that may be, only gets to say yes or no. And at that point in the show, I'm only saying yes. And the yes practice, what I like to call the yes practice, is kind of the mantra of the diva at that point. She's always saying yes to every opportunity. She's saying yes to every acknowledgement. She's saying yes to every compliment. She's saying yes to every insult. She's saying yes to every opportunity. And she's just saying yes over and over again. And it's, at that show, when I'm stripping, I'm giving you a reveal. I'm giving you, I'm pretending to be vulnerable, but I'm actually in my own vulnerability in my most control throughout the entire show. I like audience participation because having me give you the consent and permission to touch me, but yet it's still nebulous because there's still never 100% guarantee you're going to do it right. But I'm completely restricted to only saying yes to what you offer me creates a tension that I thought was really great. Mm-hmm. Also, I wanted to show the literal physical construction of what it takes to look that curvy, that shape, that silhouette as a 5'5", 136 pound person who doesn't have breasts or hips like that at all. It takes about 8 pounds of foam rubber, 5 pairs of tights, 2 dance belts, a bunch of wigs, and some glitter. It takes a lot of work to look like that. And by showing that reverse reveal or that reverse construction, I'm letting people in on the secret.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the yes piece was, that was my takeaway, really. And then, of course, the no piece that came after it. But yeah, because it seemed to me, and that kind of where it felt like you were very much a performance artist, because you were exhausting yourself. You say the word to what turns out to be almost a comedic amount of time. People are starting to laugh nervously because you just keep on saying yes over and over again, and your voice gets hoarse, and it was a really amazing piece to watch you do that while also kind of dominating the audience and kind of insisting that they undress you. I think the night that I came, there were a number of people who weren't quite sure what you were trying to get them to do, and then you just moved on and kind of, sassed them away with the yes, until people finally understood. And if then I think that the zipper got jammed. There was a lot of kind of comedy of errors in that piece. And while you're climbing literally over people in the audience, which I just thought was quite fun to watch, but also kind of intense because your voice is getting hoarse. You're getting very tired, or at least it seemed like you were getting very tired. And it was, it was just a challenging moment. And at the same time, I think it made me feel very, what's the word? Kind of, at odds with the word yes, which again, as a woman and the idea of diva, it was just a very challenging moment. I thought it was really beautifully done.
Thank you. I like hearing that. The yes about consent is also a through line of the show. It's not just about the performer's life. It's also about how you treat femininity, how you treat other people's bodies, and calling into question the audience's response and responsibility towards a performer who is yesing, in a sense. I like the stripping scene very much because it's funny. It's my most clowny moment of the show, and I am a gender clown. So there's a lot of opportunity for me to get to play while also starting to edge toward the arc of it getting a lot darker towards the middle and end of the show.
It's interesting. The clowning was so clear. And do you have you mentioned dance. So do you have a background in dance and miming and clowning and all that?
Yeah, I started doing drag at the same time I was starting my career as a dancer and performance artist. And so a lot of my training pre-drag is modern dance, Butoh, a little bit of clown, like traditional clown classes, a lot of improv, a little bit of comedy, and it just kind of all meshed together.
In what ways do you feel like that informs your drag or that has a relationship with one another?
It's funny because I am most known for being a drag queen, but I think a lot of people who know me in town and also through the website or my online persona interact with me as a alternative queen or whatever that means, because I think every queen's alternative. But I definitely weave in my arts practice with drag, and that's a way of making me, one, feel special, but also, two, keep it interesting for myself. Because drag is always changing, and the concepts of drag are always changing because everyone who's practicing it changes the form, but there's still a form and a tradition. And my tradition growing up when I started doing drag was to not be a pageant queen, to not be pretty, to not wear fake tits and hips and lip sync. That was not my tradition. But it became my tradition because it's part of the tradition. And slowly, as Miss Pepper gets prettier, she gets nicer things, as she paints her face in a way that is more readable as what drag queen is, she's treated differently. My practice is treated differently. And I'm going off tangent there for a second, but...
No, it's great.
It's, how do I say it? It's like I'm weaving together these different traditions I have in my life to create the synthesis, which is the persona Pepper Pepper. Mm-hmm. So my dance practice in modern dance and contemporary dance, a little bit of ballet and Butoh, has this whole physical, I'm a very physical performer, very like intensely focused on the body and the experience and impact. I throw myself against walls on the ground. I scream a lot. It can be really funny. So there's clown in there too, because clown allows me to really play with the audience and myself. And clown just opens up a whole universe of audience participation, of playfulness and tragedy. I feel like people are a lot more able to take the medicine if it's with a little bit of laughter, but then they still realize that what they're taking in is a deeper message, or not just about entertainment, but about whatever it is that the entertainer or myself might be sharing, political wise as well. Mm-hmm. Political wise, is that a word? Yeah. Am I making sense there? Like it's, I like to weave in those things because I feel it enriches the practice, mm-hmm. and I feel like everyone should be doing that. Mm-hmm. That is also the expectation of what RuPaul's Drag Race is set up, is that it's not just good enough that you cross-dress and are somewhat fabulous. You have to have demonstrable skills that show just exactly how fabulous you are. Mm-hmm. And that was going on a lot longer before RuPaul and will happen way after. Mm-hmm. But it's just the moment we're in.
What do you think that the mainstreaming of drag, because of Drag Race, has done for queens or performance in general?
Well, I feel like it's flooded the market with an interest, mm-hmm. and flooded the market with a lot of younger folks who are finding this as a way to achieve their goals around fame. Mm-hmm. So many youth, when asked what they want to do when they grow up, is be famous. And drag is always been a way for queers to find a kind of salvation on stage, find a way to express themselves, to be seen. I feel like the trauma of the invisibility and stigma around homosexuality and queerness and gender play in this society and culture wounds us. And from that trauma, from that kind of personal invisibility, we have to create ways in which we're going to be seen. And one of the standard community ways of doing that has been drag. Mm-hmm. For the love of God, see me, accept me, love me. I'm going to make you love me. It's a way to assert power through the repressed feminine aspects of ourselves. I feel like that is an absolute constant trope. And it's also one of my stories. So,
in what way do you feel like Pepper Pepper helped you personally with your own experience?
My ethos queen is the queen's practice. Mm-hmm. One of my ethos as a performer is that Miss Pepper turns tragic into magic and trauma into drama. That's what's on the website. That's the core practice. She's a grief witch. Mm. Her clown, herself as a clown or myself as a clown, allows me to take the parts of my life that have been difficult, painful, a struggle, and to dramatize them in a way that allows for a joyful communal celebration, mm-hmm. and attention making. Mm-hmm. It creates something that is awful and makes it special, and the ways that we do that are by bringing attention and life into the spaces that we don't want to be seen. Mm-hmm. It's a psychological tick. It's a catharsis is the cornerstone of theater practice, and drag is a really great way to do that sometimes. Mm-hmm. And also on a community level, it's because drag so often is a communal practice, mm-hmm. That it allows us to perform and relate to each other at the very level of our friends who show up and they see you, and it's exciting, and it can be dangerous, and it's really fun, and there's lots of things you could do there. Mm-hmm. For me, it really allowed me to reclaim the space in myself that was being hidden or disassociated or uncared for or unseen, especially when I was young, around gender and around my body. and around power. So being super feminine and flamboyant when I was younger, and having that beaten out of me, literally, creates a confrontation with wanting to express that part of myself. Now, there's a lot of ways to express femininity, and drag is an aspect of that. For some reason, whatever reason that is, I feel that drag allows me to engage with a specific kind of powerful feminine archetype that picks me up and allows me to do things that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And for the first 10 years of me practicing drag, I really did it to be seen, to be wanted, to feel special, to feel like I have a place. It's very exploratory. And now, as I've kind of established myself as a working artist, as an artist who uses drag, as an artist who's exploring gender, power, sexuality, intersections of queerness, and my own aesthetic choices and practices, I'm now learning about how to use those skills for others. But the bridge between that was really Miss Pepper becoming a thing. So she allows me to give voice to those parts of me that were abused or unseen and harmed, and by reclaiming, especially like around the word faggot or sissy, reclaiming those words, and that's an act of agency and power that is critical in the success of my own psyche, but also in the history and tradition of drag.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you say you're kind of helping deliver this to a community. In what ways are you doing that?
Well, I feel the communal structure of drag is changing. It's the entertainment of it and the value of it is more highlighted because of RuPaul's Drag Race and mainstreaming. But, before it was legal to cross-dress in this country, there's been drag shows. And a lot of what our modern conventions of quote-quote drag were developed by trans women and women of color and drag queens who, before you had a word for trans women, that's what was going on. And there is a difference between a cisgender-identified gay man doing drag and exploring their femininity and finding empowerment in that, and a trans woman who's performing as herself. They're from a similar tradition. We're both questioning gender norms and power, and the fact that cross-dressing and feminizing masculinity has such a punch to the patriarchal culture, there's something there for it. But a lot of the history in the gender play and the revolt and resistance and resiliency comes from the struggle for trans women and men to express femininity in our culture. Get what I'm going?
Yeah.
And so what I think a lot of the history and struggle there is rooted in the same space, but then it's a different flower that grows up from that similar struggle.
Do you find that there's, with the controversy with RuPaul saying that he didn't think that it would be appropriate for trans women to be on the show, do you have a sense that there is a true, like a significant difference between what a trans woman would do on stage versus what a cis man would do on stage?
Well, first of all, a queen's a queen. Doesn't matter what bits you have, what you want to be known for, how you identify. If you're performing with a bunch of makeup on your face and you're lip syncing to some Diva's tunes and you're going through the motions and being fabulous, you're being a queen. So that's from my tradition, is that there's no gender requirement on drag. Drag is for everybody because crossing the imposed gender binary is an inherently radical act that we can all practice. And I think RuPaul is showing her age there. Yes, it is a punch to the patriarchal culture when a man cross-dresses so flawlessly and amazing that it's entertaining on TV, but that doesn't mean a woman, trans, biologically identified, assigned female at birth, however you want to call it, is not able to be that as impactful. Masculinity is not the sole ownership and region of men. Femininity is not the sole ownership and region of women. the space in between there is the fluid in the practice that we're working with. At least that's what I believe. So I think Miss RuPaul is showing some unfortunate colors and disassociations around the current thought of what drag is and can be, and is sitting from a pretty high pedestal, considering that they're being paid to influence and determine what a lot of mainstream folks or see drag as. Another thing that I was thinking about is that back in the day, when you, how do I say this? Up until very recently, doing drag meant you were sexually untouchable by other gay men, in a sense. Your sexual capital was much lower. Your social capital outside of drag is lower. And drag's popularity now, or its resurgence now, is kind of this interesting thing, because a lot of these famous RuPaul queens are able to keep their sexual and social capital up, and yet still go and serve some amazing looks and be gorgeous and beautiful queens. Back in the day, not necessarily before it was legal, but absolutely before it was legal, and after, if you were a crossdresser, or you're a queen, or you were trans, like, you're giving up that part to be this other fabulous creature. I kind of think of it as like a spiritual sacrifice. You're making an exchange with the drag gods to be fabulous on stage, because people wouldn't come for you. Like, they wouldn't want you that way, and that's a harsh toke. And I've noticed that in the 10 years I've been doing this, that things have changed in a certain degree. But I wish that people would acknowledge that there were sacrifices made by people in the generations before us that made it easier for us to be comfortable in our own skin, to be accepted by others. Just because you are a drag queen doesn't mean you're going to be accepted in the community. And especially if you're pushing boundaries of what people think is their cultural territory. Gay men can be very possessive around drag, because a lot of people think that gay men perfected drag. And I think there is a certain quality of power that comes from when gay men do drag, but I also think that some of that power is rooted in privilege of getting to take the wig off, which in Diva practice is a big part of what I'm thinking about, is about the fact that a lot of people don't want to, or are not able to, take the wig off, or just women, for example, cannot relinquish their femininity when they're done performing it on stage. And there's a difference there. Leave it at that for now.
Where do you think the kind of quote-unquote unfuckableness came from? Like, what was the root of that?
Misogyny, which is the root of homophobia, which is the root of...
So do you think that shift is kind of showing the hand of culture, and that we're becoming less misogynist, or that gay men are starting to understand fluidity more, or...
I wish that was the case. Gosh, I wish that was absolutely the case. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would.
I feel it's exposure therapy. I feel that the more that men are exposed to the fluidity of gender, the more chances they have to accept, understand, tolerate, and practice the fluidity of gender. But that does not mean that it's going to cure misogyny. In some ways, I think it reinforces it. Unfortunately, a lot of gay cis men get really, like I said, culturally territorial around what they think is their practice. But it's not their practice. It's not anyone's practice. Being a queen is the queen's practice. I wonder if drag is helping, is what you're asking. And I think in some ways, the mainstreaming of drag is helping, because it's exposing folks to the practices of gender fluidity and questioning gender, which allows people to question power, which brings people on a crazy journey to themselves, which could be a beautiful thing. Excuse me. I feel the younger generation embraces the fluidity so much easier than my generation did, which was who embraced it easier than the previous generation. So maybe there's hope incrementally, and I would hope and pray for that. Something I've noticed is a large folks group of folks, myself included, identifying as non-binary or gender fluid, are carving a space out to understand that it's in relationship to self and power and gender. So drag can be in relationship to those things, but doesn't necessarily define the whole package anymore. And I think by breaking apart the cultural strings that are tied to what we think of as drag, or we think of as identification or presentation or sexuality and gender, that actually creates the space for people just to be. And that is something I found personally powerful and empowering about drag.
What do you see the future of drag looking like in that case?
So I was quoted in this book about drag nationally, and I said that the Pacific Northwest's future of drag is going to be poor, glamorous, and better than it's ever been. I'm a nihilist, so I kind of think that, once the water resources are getting thought of more and the internet gets so expensive that no one can do anything because of net neutrality being taken away and all these systems that we're so used to enabling our comfort and our fame seeking crumble away, we're going to have to resort back to like a different kind of drag. and what I mean by that being poor is that we're going to have to reclaim it in a less capitalistic way. We're going to have to reclaim it communally, and we're going to have to find out what that glamour and that practice of that gender shifting magic, how that will serve the community versus just necessarily our personal artistic vision or the entertainment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like I just had this vision of like sitting around a campfire and watching.
Funny thing, I started out doing drag really at a Radical Fairy camp out in the woods around a fire. And that experience really paints the picture of my ethos around tragic to magic, trauma to drama, is that the essence of glamour, and glamour is an old word. Glamour is not just beauty. Glamour, it comes from the Old English grammar, and the grammar is like occult language, secret language. And so a glamour is a spell that the witch casts to make others believe what she chooses. But the first person who has to fall for that glamour is the witch herself.
Oh, you gotta believe.
You have to believe. You have to fake it till you make it. And I really think that is this mystical magic that is embedded in drag, at least for me. That glamour isn't just about showing your best beauty face to the world, because obviously, having done a lot of monster drag in my time, it's not just about beauty. Or in the case of Diva practice, it's not just about being wanted. It's also about being engaged. It's about being possessed by a feeling, by an archetype, a sensation, and sharing the fullness of that. And I feel like that has the power to disrupt binaries and traditions and practices, and that's why it's a Diva practice. That's why Fabulous takes practice, because it's more than just beauty. It's a whole embodied spirit.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I think that's going to make sense, but I know it doesn't.
It doesn't. So one of the things I thought was also interesting about the piece of Diva practice that I saw was your use of multimedia. The way, kind of speaking to technology and the crumbling institutions that we may be seeing soon, the way that you use cameras to create this almost prismatic way of us looking at you and kind of controlling the frame in a different way, I thought was really unique and very interesting. In what ways do you use multimedia to create a different effect?
It is new in my journey. Multimedia is a new part of my artistic practice, and I really wanted to create another dimension and facet to be seen as. And in Diva practice, that means that I'm taking live feed video, running it through a program, and then creating special effects and experiences live in that moment. I'm creating video interactivity. And that's not something I see any other drag queen doing. Some other queens are doing some digital projection stuff where they edit and map out fun things that happen behind them on screen. I think that's lovely. Sasha Velour, the current reigning RuPaul Drag Race winner, does that beautifully, but it's not interactivity. I'm creating systems of information and software that react to how I'm moving through the space in real time with light and sound and timing. And so I wanted to create a show that had its own life, because that show, Diva Practice, is on a timer. It is responsive to my movement through space. It's responsive to sound. I generate sound by being in different lights and different times. The visuals are a second way into the mind or the internal practice, and it creates a beautiful aesthetic. It allows me to be in more control of the visual environment as well, and since it's a solo, it's mostly me, which I love.
Well, that actually segues nicely. So tell me more about the duet and the ensemble pieces.
Great. So Diva Practice Duet was done with my dear friend and collaborator, Mr. E, who is a woman who does drag as a woman. And one of the through lines of that story is a story about how a queen was gatekeeping Mr. E from performing because they found out her realness, in a sense. And that was what I was saying about gay men being culturally territorial. So they're scared a woman's going to be so naturally beautiful that it'll take away from the effort that they're putting into the illusion. Mm-hmm. There's tension there.
Yeah.
So Diva Duet was really about relationship to self as a twin, and the different tensions and practices it takes to be seen as an individual, but as one being, and this kind of emotional journey of self-reflection and mirroring and togetherness. Versus Diva Solo is a multimedia journey into the psychology and practice of being fabulous when all you can do is say yes until you have no more yeses to say.
Oh yeah, tell me about the no part.
The no part's really painful. The no comes right after I have this whole adult baby, like, beautiful Mariah Carey moment, which is so sweet. And then I move into my other adult baby, which is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And over the course of Diva Practice, I built Diva Practice while on a national tour during the inauguration of President Trump. And so he made it into the show because it was just such a present aspect of my consumption of media during the time. And it's really painful and it's difficult. And he has a big man-baby tantrum while my body triggers Hail to the Chief, depending on where I am in the space. And it's also a bit of a rape scene where I'm saying no and stumbling around the room. And then I have a big no with like a nuclear explosion going off and flashing behind me. And it's the least developed piece or movement of the show. And it lasts maybe 10 minutes. And it ends with me typing saying, I fucking hate this section of the show. I wish I didn't have to do it, but it's where my no is. Mm-hmm. So
it's interesting that you typed that because obviously you only speak 2 words. And so you still wanted to communicate that, how much you wanted the audience to know how much you don't like that, but with your own parameters of only using 2 words.
That came up the last day of Diva Practice. I needed to find a way to resolve the no without just abandoning them. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to just re-traumatize everyone and leave them unseen or not brought in on my own. I didn't want to leave everyone re-traumatized and alone, but I wanted to bring them in that I needed to do that. So there needed to be an acknowledgement. And since I only can vocally say yes or no, the typing through the medium of the screen allowed me a reprieve. It was the third option. When you have a binary of yes and no, man and woman, the third option is always going to be a powerful one, hence drag.
Ooh, that's nice. So tell me a little bit about ensemble. That's still in development, or?
Still in development. That will be, I'll have to do some fundraising and some practice for that practice. I'm taking a little time to understand how I want to take it, because my media practice, this could be a fully media-based piece. This could be an interactive dance show. It could be many things. And I want to really develop and explore that before I rare and present it. Something that's really special about Diva Practice is I was funded by the Oregon Arts Commission and RAC to produce this piece. And the Oregon Arts Commission Professional Development Grant allowed me to go on a national tour to about 4 or 5 different residencies in different art spaces to research and basically develop Diva Practice solo. And I went to Portland, Maine, I went to Atlanta, Georgia. I went to New Orleans, Louisiana. And then I did a little bit of time in Texas when I was arrested for being beautiful. I was not arrested, actually. Although, a funny story, I did once get stopped at the airport, and they confiscated all my makeup. And this big sheriff guy came over to me and said, "Pardon me, sir? What is all this makeup?" And I said, "Oh, please don't throw away all my makeup. It's worth thousands of dollars." And he was like, "What kind of business are you in?" And I said, "Show business." So...
Did he buy it?
I kept most of my makeup. And then, I went on that national tour. In a tour in a sense that I'm in research and development, doing works in progress showings, and meeting a lot of beautiful, amazing queens around the country, and really feeding the project and making connections. And that was a really a blessing. It's what made me full-time fabulous. It's been really great. So I'm really thankful for those organizations, and especially Caldera, the arts residency program down in Sisters, which is where this whole project really took off. I've been working on Diva practice for a couple of years, but hadn't formalized the solo until I got there and worked there.
Lovely. What do you think being in a residency gives you as an artist?
It gives a lot of other drag queens jealousy because they don't know what it is. I feel like I'm the first drag queen in residency at anywhere I go. I'm the first drag queen in residency at Caldera. But it's just, I'm an art queen. That's how I want to do it. There's lots of ways to be a queen. And being at a residency allows me time to really sink in and be isolated from my club life or my social life. And I'm just completely steeped in the pepper tea, as you were. And it allows me to just really experiment, to kind of go on a limb. And that's where a lot of my multimedia practice and visuals and all that stuff came from. So
lovely. Great. So tell people where they can find you if they want to learn more.
If you want to find out Miss Pepper Pepper, visit thepepperpepper.com. What's that? Lipstick, drag queens, tiaras, thepepperpepper.com. And you can also find me on Instagram, which is my favorite way to interact. That's at the Pepper Pepper. I'm on Twitter at the Pepper Pepper as well, but I don't ever use it, so good luck. And I'm on Facebook as Cayenne Pepper because my name is Cayenne. That's KAJ-ANNE Pepper, but that's my name, not Miss Pepper's name. And you should visit Miss Pepper at thepepperpepper.com.
Lovely. I did enjoy how you basically, coerced people into following you on Instagram in the show. That was really well done.
Well, that's actually, that's the part of the Diva practice is that our modern expectation is that you are using social media to gain followers, gain attention, and practice. But yeah, there's no acknowledgement that the social media is getting all the benefit and all your data. And it's an addiction. You have to keep using it and feeding it, or they'll take it away from you. But if we don't keep using it, where will we be? How will they know where to find me?
Wow, the tension between fame and realness and, art is so fascinating right now. I find myself thinking about it quite a lot.
Yeah, I think we are in we're starting to wake up to our deep addiction to social media. It's been engineered for us to be deeply addicted to the product, which we are.
Yep.
And you have to ask yourself, why do capitalists want this much information and control over our social lives? And maybe that's the next project. Maybe that's the next Diva practice is, can I do a show that's completely devoid of social media?
Oof. It's so scary to think about. I mean, I can't imagine being a creator in this world without telling everybody what I'm doing on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram so that they come to my thing. Yeah. I don't even know how you do that.
It's a disenchanted intimacy. And maybe we need to re-enchant ourselves into a world that loves us back. And I think about glamour, and glamour is often the practice of fake and real. But what if we just practice real as real? What is realness in the context of getting ourselves away from empowering a company's data collection? Like, I feel like I'm an ant in a farm for their Bitcoin or something, Yeah. Doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
But yet, I'm going to fiercely check my Instagram right as soon as it's done. See how many of you follow me out there and love all my photos of me.
Pepper, thank you so much. This was a lovely conversation.
Hey, thanks for having me and letting me ramble.
Yay, wonderful. And that's it for this week's episode of Artgasm. As always, if you have things to say, if you've got thoughts, if you've got feelings, if you've got thoughts about feelings, if you've got feelings about thoughts, you can always reach out to me at artgasmcast@gmail.com or tweet me at HeyAllieMoons, ALLIEMOON. You can find more about me. You can listen to more things that I put out into the world at Patreon by going to patreon.com/artgasm. And you can find the show notes for this episode and all episodes at artgasmcast.com. Until next time, bye-bye.